stripping Meghan and Andrew of their titles was the right course.
Meghan arrived at Windsor expecting ceremony, recognition, and the quiet dignity of a name still attached to royal charitable work. But the moment she stepped inside, something felt wrong. The smiles were controlled, the greetings were brief. Then came the discovery that turned a royal visit into a private humiliation. Her charity title had been stripped from every official record. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Meghan had returned for what she believed would be a routine charitable review, the kind of carefully managed palace meeting where old records were checked, polite words were exchanged, and nothing dangerous was supposed to happen. Harry walked beside her with the cautious calm of a man who knew Windsor could still wound without raising its voice. A patronage record, in plain terms, is the official palace listing that connects a royal figure to a charity or public cause. And Meghan believed her name still lived there as proof of service once given and work once honored. The aide did not smile when the revised file was placed before her. Meghan opened it slowly, expecting amendments, dates, perhaps a shortened description. Instead, she found absence. Her charity title had been removed from every palace register, every foundation archive, every ceremonial listing, and every internal recognition record linked to Windsor. Harry saw her fingers stop on the page. He saw the breath leave her before the anger came. That silence said what no speech could say. This had not been misplaced. This had been erased. Meghan looked up, and the room seemed to tighten around the question she had not yet asked. The senior courtier explained that the update was not clerical. He said it had been ordered, reviewed, and approved through a formal palace process. A formal palace process simply means a decision moved through official royal offices before it became permanent. And that detail mattered because it meant no single assistant had made a mistake. Someone with authority had wanted this. Someone had checked it. Someone had allowed it to stand. Harry leaned forward, his voice low, but the courtier did not step back. He repeated that the records now reflected the current structure of royal charitable work. Meghan heard the phrase, but she understood the message beneath it. Her name had not disappeared from one page. It had vanished across the entire system at once, as if Windsor had moved in perfect silence before she ever arrived. The file remained open between them like a verdict. Meghan no longer needed to ask whether the title was gone. The only question left was who had the power, the motive, and the courage to remove it so completely. And as she stood in that Windsor room with the file still open, the real shock was waiting behind another door, where the people involved had already chosen their sides. A royal record is never just ink on paper. It is memory, rank, duty, and belonging. For Meghan, the missing title felt like a message. For Harry, it felt like a punishment. For Charles, it was a question of order. For William, it was about protecting the future. And inside Windsor, every silence suddenly had a name. Meghan sat across from Harry in a private waiting room, still holding the altered page like it might change if she looked long enough. Her charity title had once carried more than a line of honor. It tied her to service, visibility, and influence, inside a royal structure that had already become painful to stand near. A charity title, in plain terms, is the official name or role connecting someone to a cause. And for Meghan, that title had been one of the last signs that her work had not been swallowed by family conflict. Harry watched her thumb press against the empty space where the words should have been, and his anger rose because he understood what that absence meant. Meghan whispered that they had not just removed a title, they had removed a chapter of her life. Harry did not answer quickly. He gripped the arm of his chair, caught between the need to defend his wife and the cold truth that the palace had moved with legal precision. That precision mattered because it turned pain into policy. It meant the decision could not be brushed away as a misunderstanding. It meant someone had planned the wound, approved it, and left Meghan to discover it inside Windsor rather than warning her before she arrived. Charles saw the matter differently, and that difference made the room feel even colder. To the king, the monarchy could not afford blurred roles when private tension had already spilled into public charitable work. A palace register, explained simply, is the official internal list that records royal roles, events, and recognized duties. Charles believed that if the register kept Meghan attached to a role she no longer actively held, the crown would look confused, divided, and weak. The monarch had spent years trying to steady the institution, and he feared one disputed title could become another crack in the wall. William's position arrived through a documented account, prepared for the king's office, and the prince's words carried the weight of the future. He argued that royal-linked charity records had to reflect working status, not emotional history. William did not speak with cruelty in that account, but he spoke with finality, and finality was sometimes sharper than anger. Camilla's role was quieter, but not softer. In a recorded private conversation summarized for Charles, the queen consort warned that unfinished titles become unfinished conflicts, and her phrase about cleaning the record stayed close to the king long after the conversation ended. Meghan saw erasure. Harry saw betrayal. Charles saw order. William saw protection. Camilla saw a loose thread pulled at last. The emotional battlefield was now clear, but the deepest wound had not yet been named. Because the removal did not begin on the day Meghan arrived at Windsor, it began months earlier, with one private incident nobody inside the palace could forget. Every royal rupture has a moment people later point to and say, that was when everything changed. Not the official announcement, not the public statement. The real beginning is usually smaller, quieter, and more dangerous. In this story, the trigger was not a headline. It was a charity reception at St. George's Hall, where one sentence hardened the palace against Meghan. Meghan had walked into that reception months before the Windsor arrival with Harry beside her, both of them aware that every smile carried history. William stood only a few steps away, speaking with senior palace figures beneath the heavy pressure of duty, while the room tried to pretend old tensions had not followed them inside. St. George's Hall, in plain terms, is one of Windsor Castle's grand ceremonial spaces, used for important royal gatherings. And that mattered because the setting made every word feel official, even when it was spoken softly. Meghan knew the event was meant to celebrate continuity between royal charitable work and modern causes. Harry knew it was also a test. Meghan accepted the greeting of a foundation trustee who thanked her for continuing the royal mission, and for one brief second, the words seemed harmless. Then she answered with calm firmness that the work had never been the palace's gift to control. Harry saw the change instantly. Courtiers stiffened. A senior aide stopped mid-sentence. The trustee looked down as if the floor had suddenly become safer than Meghan's face. She had not shouted. She had not insulted anyone. But inside that room, her sentence landed like a challenge. William heard it from a few steps away, and the prince did not interrupt. That restraint made the moment more dangerous, not less. He turned slightly, his expression hardening as he measured what the remark meant for the future. To Meghan, it sounded like independence. To Harry, it sounded like truth. To William, it sounded like a public claim over royal-linked work that the institution could no longer afford to leave unclear. The future king understood that charity was not just kindness inside the monarchy. It was reputation, structure, and control. The exchange became the trigger. A confidential review later cited Meghan's St. George's Hall conversation with the trustee as evidence that her charity title had created public confusion. A confidential review simply means an internal palace assessment prepared for senior decision-makers. And this one carried the kind of quiet force that could reshape a life without ever making a public sound. Meghan's words were recorded not as emotion, but as risk. Harry's presence was noted. William's concern was included. The palace had found its reason. Charles received the written summary the next morning, and the king read it alone. He set the page down, waited in silence, then told a private secretary that the records must be made consistent. That phrase sounded clean. It sounded calm. But it opened the path to something far harsher. What began as one sentence at a reception became a formal process. And by the time Meghan returned to Windsor, the argument was no longer theoretical. The confrontation waiting for her would expose just how personal the decision had become. The palace can survive scandal. It can survive distance. It can survive silence. But it cannot survive a room where everyone finally says what they have been hiding. Behind a closed Windsor door, Meghan faced the decision directly. Harry sat beside her. Charles carried the weight of the crown. William chose his words carefully. And the air turned colder with every breath. Meghan entered the private meeting room with Harry close beside her, and she knew at once that this had never been arranged for comfort. Charles was already waiting. William stood near him, calm enough to seem distant, but not calm enough to hide the strain. There were no photographers, no public aides, and no ceremonial phrases to soften the blow. A ceremonial phrase, in plain terms, is the polished royal language used to make painful decisions sound dignified. None of that could protect anyone now, because the revised file was already in Meghan's hand, and the missing title had become impossible to ignore. Meghan placed the file on the table with a quiet firmness that made everyone look at it. She asked Charles whether the removal was meant to correct the record or punish her. The king looked down before answering, and that single pause told Harry more than any explanation could. Charles said the decision was about active roles, current responsibilities, and institutional boundaries. Institutional boundaries simply means the official line between who represents the monarchy and who does not, and the monarch believed that line had grown too dangerous to leave blurred. Meghan heard the meaning clearly. Windsor was not only managing paperwork, Windsor was deciding who still belonged. Harry turned toward William, and the hurt in his voice cut through the room. He said the decision felt like another door being locked from the inside. The prince did not flinch, but his jaw tightened. He told Harry that the monarchy could not keep titles alive out of sentiment, because sentimental records become public confusion, and public confusion becomes weakness. William spoke like a future king trying to protect the crown, yet Harry heard only a brother choosing structure over blood. Charles admitted the decision had passed through his office, but he did not call it revenge. The king called it final housekeeping for a monarchy under pressure. That phrase sounded almost harmless, and that was what made it sting. Meghan understood then that the palace had dressed a symbolic act in administrative clothing. This was not merely about updating records. This was Windsor drawing a border around official royal service, and placing her on the other side with deliberate care. Meghan looked from Charles to William, and neither man offered the apology she needed. Harry waited for some crack in the wall, some human word that might soften the decision, but none came. The meeting ended with no reversal, no compromise, and no promise to review what had been done. When the door closed behind Meghan and Harry, Windsor did not feel calmer. It felt like the machinery beneath the crown had finally started moving in full view. Power inside a palace rarely announces itself. It moves through notes, approvals, careful phrases, and decisions that appear inevitable by the time anyone sees them. Meghan's missing title looked like a record change, but behind it stood a chain of authority, and at the center of that chain was a question the monarchy could no longer avoid. Who gets to define royal service? Charles sat alone with the final approval sheet in front of him, and the silence around the desk felt heavier than any argument. The removal had been traced through a palace review committee, a small internal group tasked with checking whether titles, charity language, and archived royal links still matched the monarchy's current structure. A palace review committee, in plain terms, is a group of officials who study records before senior royals make final decisions. And this mattered because Meghan's name had not been crossed out in anger. It had been examined, processed, and carried upward through the system until it reached the king. Charles paused when he saw Meghan's name. He pressed his thumb against the margin, as if the paper itself carried more weight than he wanted to admit. The king held final authority, but the reasoning around him had already hardened. William's future-facing influence shaped the logic behind the decision. The monarchy had to become smaller, clearer, and less vulnerable to competing claims. That mattered because every royal-linked charity title carried public meaning. If one old title remained alive, even in an archive, it could suggest a connection the palace no longer wanted to defend. William later spoke privately with a senior aide, according to a documented account prepared for the king's office. The prince said the decision was painful, but necessary, and his restraint revealed the cost he understood but refused to reverse. He knew Meghan would see the removal as erasure. He knew Harry would see it as betrayal. But William also believed the crown could not keep emotional bridges inside official records simply because removing them would hurt. The future king was not blind to the suffering. He was choosing the institution anyway. Camilla's influence moved more quietly, but it moved with precision. In a recorded private conversation summarized for Charles, the queen consort warned that unfinished titles become unfinished conflicts. She did not need to demand anything loudly. She only had to name the danger in a way the king already feared. Camilla understood that the monarchy survives by controlling symbols, and Meghan's charity title had become exactly that, a symbol the palace could no longer leave untouched. Charles signed without speaking. The hidden detail came later, and it changed the meaning of everything. The palace had not removed Meghan from one record first. It had synchronized the change across every file, every archive, every charitable reference, and every internal listing to prevent any future claim of inconsistency. That synchronization made the act final. It meant there would be no forgotten page, no surviving title, no quiet loophole Harry could point to later. Meghan had not simply lost a line in a file. She had been moved outside the official memory of Windsor's charitable work. Once the records changed everywhere, the removal became more than a decision. It became a new reality she would have to face beyond the palace walls. And when Meghan stepped back into the open air, the weight of that new reality followed her. No longer hidden in files, but written across every silence around her. Some decisions wound quietly. Others follow people into the daylight. Meghan left Windsor with no crown taken from her head, no public rebuke shouted across the courtyard, no dramatic announcement from the balcony. Yet something had been removed all the same. A title was gone, a record was changed, and the first consequence was written on Harry's face. Meghan paused near the Windsor gate with the folder still in her hand, and the silence around her felt sharper than any statement. Harry walked beside her, visibly furious, but he did not rush her. He knew that if he spoke too quickly, anger would become the only sound left between them. The revised records were already moving through internal departments, charity offices, and archival teams. An archival team, in plain terms, is the group responsible for keeping official historical files accurate and organized. And that mattered because Meghan's removal was no longer trapped inside one meeting room. It was spreading through the permanent memory of the institution. Meghan looked down at the folder, but she did not cry. That stillness made the blow feel deeper. She had entered Windsor thinking the title still held some trace of her service, some proof that the work had mattered even after the family bond had cracked. Now the palace was preparing a neutral explanation, one built around accuracy, current duties, and formal alignment with active royal roles. Formal alignment simply means making every record match the monarchy's official position. And to the crown, that sounded clean. To Meghan, it sounded like a polished way of saying she had been removed. Harry stopped when an aide approached, and his anger finally broke through. He told the aide that the family had mistaken control for dignity. The words landed hard. The aide lowered his eyes, not because he disagreed, but because no safe answer existed. Harry understood the palace had not simply chosen paperwork over emotion. It had chosen to make the pain look reasonable. That was what made him furious. The decision was dressed in calm language, but the wound beneath it was raw. Meghan learned moments later that invitations connected to the charity title had already been amended. Her removal was not pending, it was operational. A palace secretary confirmed through a documented internal note that external organizations had been notified before Meghan arrived, and that detail changed everything. It meant the Windsor meeting had never been a negotiation. It had never been a chance to explain, appeal, or defend the meaning of her work. It had been a presentation of a completed decision, wrapped in procedure and delivered after the damage was already done. Meghan closed the folder slowly, and something in her expression changed. The hurt did not vanish. It hardened. Harry saw it happen, and understood that grief was turning into resolve. She no longer needed to ask whether she still had a place inside the record. The palace had answered that with brutal clarity. Now the real question was, what kind of power remained outside it? And that answer would come not from a committee, not from a courtier, and not from Windsor, but from one final private exchange no institution could control. The turning point did not come with shouting. It came in a room where there were no aides, no files, no polished explanations, and no palace language left to hide behind. Meghan and Harry sat together after Windsor, facing the kind of silence that follows humiliation. But in that silence, something changed. The loss stopped looking like defeat, and began looking like release. Meghan placed the folder on a table, and pushed it away, as if the pages still carried the coldness of Windsor. Harry sat close, but he did not rush to fill the quiet. He had seen her wounded before, yet this was different. The title's removal had forced both of them to confront a painful truth. The monarchy had chosen final separation over symbolic connection. A symbolic connection, in plain terms, is a public sign that a relationship still exists, even when the private bond is damaged. Meghan understood now that even that sign had been taken. Meghan looked at Harry and said she would not spend the rest of her life asking the palace to remember her fairly. The words were calm, but they carried years of exhaustion. She had fought to be understood, then defended, then simply acknowledged. Now Windsor had made the answer plain. It had not only removed a charity title, It had removed the last official reminder that her work had once been welcomed inside royal walls. Harry heard the finality in her voice, and his anger softened into grief. Harry reached for her hand, and for a moment, the fight drained out of him. He admitted that part of him had still hoped Windsor might leave one bridge standing. Not a grand return, not forgiveness, just one quiet proof that the family had not erased everything. A royal record, in simple terms, is an official written trace of duty, title, or service. And that mattered because records outlive arguments. Harry had believed one record might survive the damage. Now he knew the bridge had been deliberately closed. Meghan realized the palace had given her something it never meant to give: clarity. By removing her from every record, Windsor had freed her from pleading for recognition inside a system that no longer wanted to offer it. That clarity did not heal the wound, but it changed its shape. She was no longer waiting for permission to matter. She was no longer searching palace files for proof that her service had value. Harry watched that realization settle over her, and he understood the moment had shifted. Meghan had entered Windsor looking for dignity inside the institution's memory. She was leaving with something harder, colder, and perhaps stronger: the choice to stop asking. Their private acceptance became the emotional turning point, but outside that room, the world was about to see the decision and judge what it meant. And when the story finally reached the public, it did not arrive as a quiet administrative update. It landed like proof that the royal split had entered its final chapter. By morning, the private wound had become a public spectacle. What began in a Windsor records room now belonged to newspapers, broadcasters, commentators, and crowds outside palace gates. The monarchy had tried to make the decision clean. Instead, it became symbolic. One missing title turned into a national argument about loyalty, punishment, service, and the price of leaving royal life behind. Meghan watched the coverage from a private sitting room, sitting so still that Harry knew not to interrupt her thoughts. The palace had issued a carefully worded statement saying the records had been updated to reflect current official royal roles and active charitable responsibilities. An official royal role, in plain terms, is a duty or position recognized by the crown as part of its public work. And that mattered because the palace was not just explaining a record change. It was telling the world Meghan no longer stood inside that circle. Harry heard the statement read aloud and immediately understood why it sounded so cold. It had no anger in it. That made it worse. Meghan kept her eyes on the screen as broadcasters repeated the phrase, "stripped from every record." Each time the words returned, her face tightened, and Harry quietly turned the volume down. He did not do it to hide the truth from her. He did it because the truth had become noise, and the noise had become cruel. The palace statement avoided emotional language, but its restraint made the decision feel sharper to the public. No apology, no regret, no mention of service. Just accuracy, alignment, and active duties. Meghan had been turned into a correction. Charles received the morning brief and studied the headlines in silence. The king did not look triumphant. He looked tired, as though the monarchy had won the argument and still lost something it could never recover. A morning brief, simply explained, is a summary of major news and public reaction prepared for senior royal figures. And this one mattered because it showed the decision had escaped palace control. Charles saw loyalty praised by some, cruelty condemned by others, and family pain turned into national debate. The monarch had wanted clarity. He had received exposure. One vivid image captured the entire reaction. A London newspaper ran a stark front page showing Windsor Castle under a grey sky with the headline, "Erased from the record." Outside Windsor, a small crowd gathered near the castle barriers. Some held phones. Others argued quietly. One woman told a broadcaster in a recorded street interview, "Whatever people think of Meghan, erasing someone feels brutal." That single sentence cut through the palace language more deeply than any expert panel could. Meghan heard the quote later, and for the first time that morning, she looked away from the screen. Harry watched her expression shift, not into victory, but into recognition. The public was divided, but the wound had been seen. Charles understood the same truth from the other side of the palace wall. The decision was no longer hidden inside files. It had become a mirror held up to the monarchy itself. The world had reacted. The palace had spoken, and Meghan had absorbed the blow. Now only one question remained, not about the title, but about what its removal truly meant. In the end, The stripped charity title was not just an administrative act. It was the monarchy drawing a final line through a complicated past. For Meghan, it was painful confirmation. For Harry, it was another family door closing. For Charles and William, it was discipline over sentiment. And for the crown, it was a victory that carried unmistakable loss. Meghan looked one last time at the old listing beside the new one, and the difference felt cruel in its simplicity. One page remembered her, one page did not. Her former charity title was no longer recognized within palace registers, foundation archives, ceremonial listings, or Windsor documentation. A ceremonial listing, in plain terms, is an official record used to show who is connected to royal events, duties, or honors. And this mattered because those pages shape how the monarchy remembers people. Meghan understood that Windsor had not simply changed language, it had changed memory. Harry stood near the window, no longer arguing, no longer demanding another explanation from a family that had already answered through procedure. His anger had burned down into sorrow because he knew the choice was final. The monarchy presented the outcome as clarity, but the emotional cost could not be hidden. This decision touched service, identity, family, and the painful question of whether a person's contributions still mattered after the relationship broke. Harry saw that order had been chosen over reconciliation, and the silence between him and Meghan carried the weight of that truth. Charles privately acknowledged the severity of the decision in a documented account from a senior aide who recorded the king's remarks after the final brief. He understood that history would not remember this only for its legal precision. It would remember the emotional force of it. The king had protected the institution's records, but the monarch had also confirmed how cold protection can look when family stands on the other side of the line. Charles had wanted consistency. He had gained it, but consistency had come with a wound. William accepted the burden in his own quiet way. The prince knew the future monarchy he wanted would be cleaner, smaller, and easier to defend. He also knew it would feel colder to those it left behind. That was the cost he chose to carry. William had not acted without understanding the pain. He had acted because he believed the crown could no longer survive on blurred bonds, old titles, and half-open doors. Meghan closed the folder. She did not ask for the title back. That gesture became her acceptance. The final verdict was clear. Meghan lost a title, but the monarchy lost the last soft bridge between Windsor and the life she built beyond it. The crown protected its records, yet exposed its heart. The decision was complete, irreversible, and deeply symbolic. It did not simply remove Meghan from a page. It confirmed that the royal separation had become permanent. There was no next door left to open in this chapter. Windsor made its choice. Meghan accepted the wound. Harry carried the sorrow beside her. Charles held the order he believed was necessary. William carried the future he had helped define. And the monarchy walked away with its records clean, but its family story permanently marked. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.